Hey, mathletes, welcome to another episode of Math with Coach Jon. In today's episode is going to be focusing on multiplying and dividing integers. We did a video earlier about how to add and subtract integers. So if you need any help with the adding and subtracting portion of it, don't worry. There's a video ready for you. But today we're going to focus on multiplying and dividing integers. And just a review, remember integers are just basically whole numbers that could either be a negative value or a positive value. So remember, integers don't have decimals, they don't have fractions, which is great because we don't have to deal with that aspect of it, just focusing on the fact that they could be negative or positive numbers, which could always make life a little bit more interesting. Okay, so we're going to work on 5 questions today. Okay, and so our first expression we have here is we have a -3 times a -5. Now, what happens as you get older is when you're multiplying numbers, they change the way they're written. Okay, when we were in elementary school, or if you're still in elementary school, a lot of times you may see numbers that are written, maybe not so much with the negative values, but you'll see them written with the X like this, back in the good old days, okay? The reason as you get older, they stop using the X is because when you get into algebra, you're gonna see variables. There's something called a variable, which means you're gonna start seeing expressions that have letters in them. Okay, and a variable or a letter that they use a lot is the letter X. So what happens as you get into older math, if they wrote multiplication with the X, it would start getting really confusing. Wait, is that an X or is that a multiplication symbol? So as you start getting older, into some of the higher maths, they don't use the X anymore. Okay, from the X, you may have seen a multiplication problem written out like this, -3, and then it has a dot, -5. Which is another way of writing multiplication. That would be another way of saying -3 times -5. But the reason, again, that they stop doing that as you get into some of the upper maths is because then it starts getting confusing as far as, wait, is that a multiplication symbol? Is it a decimal? Is it one of those things? So it's So what happens is as you get older, when they start saying multiplication, they start using things like parentheses. Okay, so that's what these are right here, just parentheses. Okay, so they don't, as you get older, they'll stop using the X or the dot. It'll just be parentheses, or they can use brackets, things like that, okay? So what we have here is we have a -3 times a -5, okay? So when you see that parenthesis in there, again, just a reminder, that's letting you know that these two numbers are being multiplied, okay? And so when you're multiplying integers, okay, now remember, we gave some strategies on how we could add or subtract integers. We talked about it that if they have the same sign, we would add and keep the sign. But if we're dealing with integers and they have different signs, we would subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. But in this case, when you're multiplying or dividing, if the two numbers have the same sign, okay, the answer will always come out as a positive number, okay? But if your two integers that you're multiplying or dividing, if they do have different signs, then the answer always comes out negative, okay? So this is how we deal with multiplying and dividing integers. This is what we will work on. If they have the same sign, the answer always comes out positive. If they have different signs, the answers always come out negative. Okay. What I'll do here is when I'm writing these, if it's a negative number, I'm going to write it in orange. And if it's a positive number, I'll write it in green. Okay. So when I'm looking here, I see that these two numbers are negatives. And we said, okay, our negative numbers we'll write in orange. So I'm going to rewrite this expression as -3 times a -5. And what we notice here is when we rewrote these two numbers, they have the same color, which means they have the same sign. They're both negative numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply them. 3 times 5 is 15. And because we said that they have the same value, they're both negative numbers, the answer always comes out positive. Okay. And the reason why that is a negative times a negative is a positive. So that's why our answer will come out positive. All right. So we're jumping down then to our next question. We have a 6 times a -4. All right. So the 6 is a positive, so I'm going to write that in green. But when I look over here at the 4, that is a negative value. So it's going to be 6 times a -4. Okay. So obviously the first number is written in green. That means it's positive. The second number is written in orange because it was a negative. So they have different colors, which means they have different values. They have different signs. And we said when we multiply these numbers and get the answer, it'll come out negative because they have different signs. So 6 times a -4 would be -24. Okay. And the reason, again, why that is because a positive times a negative is a negative. All right. All right. So first one, check. That one's done. It's in the books. So here we go with our next 2 questions. All right. And again, as we're doing these, mathletes, if you ever want to pause it, as we're starting to go through these and you're starting to feel like, hey, I'm getting comfortable with this. And you could always pause the video and then try to work out the problem yourself. And then you can push play and see how you did. That's always another option too when you're practicing these problems, okay? All right, so here we go with number 3. All right, so here we have a negative 24, and it looks like a fraction, negative 24 over 8. And I know some of us may be saying like, hey, Coach Jon, I thought you said no fractions. I thought these were whole numbers. What that is, a fraction is really basically a division symbol, okay? So what this is really saying is negative 24 divided by 8. Now, when we were younger, we would see things a lot like this. It would be negative 24 divided by 8. We would see more problems written like this. Okay, but as you start getting into algebra 2 and those kind of things and the higher maths, what a lot of times when they're doing division, a lot of times it's just written with that fraction symbol. And even on calculators, sometimes a calculator will use this as the division symbol. There's some calculators that will just use like a slash like that, because basically what they're saying, like if we were working out this problem and we used a calculator, it would be a negative 24. We would hit that slash or the division symbol, and then we'd hit the 8 and of course the equals. Okay, so that's what that means in math. As we're getting older, they tend to stop doing that division symbol and they start using the fraction. So it's something that you really want to start getting used to. Mathletes is seeing an expression with that bar and understand that that means division. Okay, but again, I'm going to remind us up here that if we're dividing numbers that have the same sign, they're either both negative or both positive, that the answer will always come out positive. Okay, and that if we have two numbers that we're dividing that have different signs, one's a positive, one's a negative, they have different signs, then the answer always comes out as a negative. Okay, so looking at here, I got a negative 24. So I'm going to write that as I'm going to put that in the color orange. I got a negative 24 divided by, and this number is a positive. Remember, if a number doesn't have a sign in front of it, that means it's a positive. So that means it's a positive 8. So I'm going to write that in green. So we're looking at this, I got different colors, which means that these two numbers have different signs. One's a negative, one's a positive. Okay, so our first step, of course, is to divide. 24 divided by 8 is 3. But because they have different signs, we said when we are dividing or multiplying integers, if they have different, the answer always comes out as a negative. Okay, so a negative divided by a positive is a negative. Here we go. All right, so I'm jumping down here to the fourth question. I have a negative 28 divided by, there's that bar, divided by a negative 7. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite these in orange because they're both negative numbers. But when we look at this, because they're both written in orange, that means they have the same value or the same sign. Okay, and when we're multiplying or dividing integers, we said if they have the same sign, that the answer always comes out positive. So we know our answer is actually going to be a positive number because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Okay, so we're not even worried about the negative signs anymore because they basically just canceled each other out. Negative over a negative is a positive. So then we could just focus on dividing. 28 divided by 7 is 4. And you got it. You're done. All righty. So we're on to our last question. And Mathletes, this one I wanted to make it a little bit more challenging. I always like to throw a curveball in there a little bit here. And the curveball that we have here is we have both operations happening here. I see at the top, we have some multiplication going on, and we know that's multiplication. Again, remember, we see these parentheses. So that's basically saying negative 3 times a positive 8. And then we see that division bar right here. So we have multiplication and division in the same question, okay? And remember, if we're ever multiplying or dividing two integers that have the same sign, the answer is a positive number. Okay, just putting it up there just as always our reminder. But if we're dealing with multiplying or dividing two integers that have different signs, okay, that means that answer is always going to come out as a negative. All right, so let's check this out. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on the top. So we'll worry about that negative 4 last, okay? So I'm looking up here. I have a negative 3, and I'm multiplying it times a positive 8. Okay, so I'm going to write my negative number here. So I'm going to say negative 3. And then that 8, there's no sign in front of it, which means it's a positive number. So I'm going to write that in green. Okay. So remember, they have two different colors. Why do we do that? This just reminds us that they have different signs. Okay. One's a negative, one's a positive. Okay. So we're going to multiply them. 3 times 8 is 24. But because they have different values, one's a negative, one's a positive, the answer has to come out to be negative. So this is a negative 24 as our answer there. So negative 3 times a positive 8, and negative times a positive is a negative 24, okay? So what I'm going to do is all of that craziness up at the top, the negative 3 times a positive 8, I'm going to substitute it with this answer that we found right here. So I'm going to put negative 24. Okay. Now I got my division bar there. I'm going to write that. And then at the bottom, I got a negative 4. Okay. So what we have right here is I have a negative 24 divided by a negative 4. Okay. Since they're both negatives, I'm going to write them. We said we're going to write all our negative numbers in orange. Okay. So when we look at here, because they have the same color, that means they have the same sign. They're both negatives. Okay. So what we said when we're multiplying or dividing integers, if they have the same sign, the answer always comes out positive. Okay. Because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Okay. So basically the good thing is here, the negative signs basically just cancel each other out. Okay. And so then all we're worried about is just these two numbers. 24 divided by 4 is a 6. And that is the final answer. I'm going to double box it because that's the final answer. Okay. So a negative 3 times a positive 8 divided by a negative 4, the final answer is a positive 6. All right, mathletes, that's all we got for this episode of multiplying and dividing integers. Okay. So if hopefully that helps. If you have any other skills or different things that you may need help with, just put it in the comment section. Hey, Coach Jon, may need help with this or may need help with that. Just let me know. We'll try to make future videos to try to get you squared away there. But if you could subscribe to the video, like this video, of course, that will always be appreciated. And we'll talk to you soon.